No news on NCAA tournament expansion, but don't start celebrating because we're not out of the woods just yet.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Schade, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and give, of course, a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you who've been hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Reminder, you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And, of course, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Well, Isaac, we talked about this a little bit towards the end of last week. The NCAA tournament expansion decision was expected. The committee met, and we were expecting some kind of decision on how many teams were going to be in the NCAA tournament in 2026, whether they were going to do expansion in 2027, and instead we got a nothing burger. No announcement. They just said, hey, everything's still on the table. So what does that mean? Is that good news? Is that bad news? I guess it depends on who you ask and what you want to see out of this. We're going to get into all of that and talk about maybe some different ways to look at the lens of expansion. And then we're going to close out the show with the unfortunate news about Auburn guard Tahaad Pettiford getting arrested on a DUI charge over the weekend. We're going to talk about what that means for Auburn, for the program, for Coach Bruce Pearl, and maybe for Tahaad Pettiford as well. But we're going to start the show, Isaac, with the topic that we have discussed more times than I would like to have discussed over the last couple of years on Locked On College Basketball, because it comes up every single offseason, the expansion of the NCAA tournament, which is, of course, currently at 68 teams. And there's been conversation about it expanding to 72 or even as high as 76 teams. And yet, I'm going to read a quick blurb from the NCAA committee after Friday's meetings, and then we can or Thursday's meetings, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about what this means. They came out of the meetings and did not make any official decision or even recommendation. Here's the direct quote from Dan Gavitt. He says, "The topic of expanding the field for each championship was discussed at length, but no decision or recommendation was made." So, Isaac, we're still stuck sitting here not knowing when or if or how NCAA tournament expansion is going to happen. Are we viewing this as a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, it's at least a short-term win that they didn't just push it through without, like, what this tells me is that they're at the very least taking this more seriously than I think a lot of us thought they would. They, as a committee. And so to that point, it's good news. And Andy, keep in mind, this is both on the men's and women's side. I know this is a men's college basketball podcast, but the men's and women's committees were meeting separately, men down in Savannah, women up in Philly, and neither committee came to a decision. So for now, and I do mean a very right now, things are still at 68, not yet moving to 72 or 76, not backing down to the ideal 64 either. And Andy, like, I'm appreciative of this, but I think one of the things for me is that how many times have they kicked the can down the road on this thing? And it's like, if I felt comfortable that they would keep on swinging that leg, cool, let's keep kicking the can down the road. But at some point, I feel like they're going to stop doing it. So it's like a piss or get off the pot situation in some way. Like, either do it or just say, hey, look, we're not going to do this. As we look at it, the viable outcomes, Andy, I wish a viable outcome was going back to 64, but let's be honest, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So really the only viable outcomes at this point are remaining at 68, please, dear Jesus, going to 72 or going to 76. And the more and more teams we add to it, the more and more slashes it affects. We could go maybe some other time, Andy. I don't know that it's the purview of what we want to talk about today, but I would love for us to put up a hypothetical 76 team bracket and just show everybody what that actually means, right? Like, I don't know that we've done that, but I want people to realize just how invasive adding another 8 teams would be for the Tuesday, Wednesday situation of it all. And from the unbeautification of the bracket standpoint, like we've got all this, it's so beautiful. I know we've got the 4 games that are offset, but the more teams you add, the more games you offset, the more slashes there are on your bracket, and the harder it is to understand. And so, Andy, that's where it's just a little like, for me, like, all right, short-term win, yes. But as you said in the cold open, we're definitely not out of the woods yet, and we got to get like the public outcry must continue. So, Andy, then, response to that from you, and or move us into what does that mean for the 2026 tournament?
Yeah, and I think that's what's so unique here is that they didn't come to a conclusion, they didn't come to a recommendation at all, but they haven't ruled out something changing in 2026, which it feels to me like at the bare minimum that probably should have happened in these meetings. Like if you're going to meet and you're going to bring the committee together, which is logistically already a challenge. You have this meeting scheduled. Both the men's and women's committees are meeting separately. Like you said, they meet, they have their meetings, they discuss this, and nobody can come to a conclusion. Nobody can even come to a collective recommendation. And you're still telling us here in mid-July that there's the opportunity for this to change for this upcoming season. It feels to me like this meeting should have been hey, if we don't come to a conclusion, 2026 will stay at 64 teams. But they didn't even conclude that. Again, this is from the same statement made by Dan Gavitt. He said, quote, "The still viable options include the tournaments remaining at 68 teams or expanding the fields to either 72 or 76 teams in advance of the 2026 or 2027 championships," which this is an incredible statement that effectively says nothing has changed. Everything is still on the table. They concluded nothing. They changed nothing. They altered nothing. They said every single option that you as an audience knew was still an option is still an option. Great. So we gained nothing. We grew in no way. We learned nothing really out of this. They basically said everything is still an option. And Matt Norlander's reporting, which has been a huge source for us on this, and he did a great job of laying out the pros and cons and talking to sources and everything. He believes that a final decision is expected by the end of the month. And I'm not trying to just talk negatively about him or anybody else, but like everybody believed that this meeting that happened late last week was also there was going to be a result from this. Everybody who was reporting on it said the overwhelming odds are that they will come to some conclusion, and they did not. So I will take a end of the month deadline with a little bit of grain of salt, not because I think Norlander's reporting is bad, but because the people who told him that are also the people who didn't seem to come to a conclusion this last time. So color me a tiny bit skeptical on that. But yeah, I think for me, it's definitely a good thing that they are taking this seriously. And if they were just listening to the money, the talking heads who are saying, hey, this is going to make our conference more money, it's going to be good for the sport, and they weren't listening to the fan outcry, the media outcry, the people who are saying, we don't want this event expanded. We do not want you to touch the NCAA tournament. If they were not listening to these people, I think we would have gotten an announcement. So I agree with you that I think this is a good thing, but to me, I still, and maybe I'm just a cynic, but I feel like NCAA tournament expansion is a win, not an if. And the win has been moved back a little bit, but I still think it's inevitable, even if I disagree with the thought process behind it.
I thought instead of when, like WHEN, I thought you said WIN. I was like, why did you just change your tone, sir? You have never said it's a win. Yeah,
no, that's not a win.
and Andy, I think a lot of people might say, okay, so what? Why does it matter to get 2026 figured out? Why do they need to give us something right now? It's July. They got however many months to figure out travel logistics and all that stuff. True. But Andy, think about the scheduling of it for people. Yeah. If I know right now that they're going to, if I'm a high major school who knows that I'm going to have a tough conference schedule, and we're adding 8 more teams to the bubble, basically, then that completely alters my non-conference schedule.
Right.
If I know that if I can win basically all but one of my non-con games as a high major, and that's going to put me in great bubble standing, cool. I'm completely altering how I change my non-con schedule. Like there's going to be a whole bunch of schools that are like, oh wait, you're changing the 26 schedule, NCAA tournament. renege. I'm going to pull back what my already announced non-con schedule and make it a whole lot easier. Because why would I make it difficult if you're going to give me 8 more bubble spots, basically? Come on. The bubble's already weak. It's going to get weaker. And now we're going to see scheduling change as well. So, Andy, why don't we have a decision yet? What is the holdup in these decision-making processes? Why are they taking so long? Why can't they come? Why do we have a hung jury, basically? That's the conversation we're going to get into having in just a second. Right after I tell you about Gametime. Have you ever decided, man, the last minute, let's head to the ballpark. Let's have a night. Let's make a night of it. Let's have a good time out on the town. Go take in 9 innings and see what happens. Maybe it's game day and you just suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. Well, that's exactly where our friends at Gametime come in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without all the stress. And with the money that you can save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come along with you. Gametime makes all of that possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app, you hear this all the time, actually drops the closer you get to first pitch. And I've got a real-world example of that for you today. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worrying out of buying. Gametime is the official ticket partner of MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming MLB game. All-Star game Tuesday in Atlanta. They're in a rain delay, funny enough, in St. Louis. Those Braves are. They got to get back to Atlanta. And All-Star game tickets have indeed come down, and the get-in price right now is $272, including fees. Seriously, this is proof of concept. The tickets last week were like $302 for the cheapest, and now it's already down to $272. There's all that money you save, and it could even keep going down. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So, Andy, a very natural question to ask next is, okay, we were told, we were promised, whatever you want to say, that a decision would be arrived at last week. Of course, as we said about kicking the can down the road, I feel like we've heard that said a lot about NCAA tournament expansion. But why now? Why the holdup? You mentioned the public outcry. Perhaps that has some things to do with it, whether from, Johnny Q Public or media, whomever it may be. Are there other potential reasons for a holdup here?
I think the public pressure is probably part of it. Like, I think that, the NCAA is so driven by finances and by money. And I think part of the concern, part of the challenge that the NCAA is dealing with right now is that they're getting pressure to expand the tournament from people who have a lot of power. The SEC commissioner, the Big Ten commissioners, like people who not only have power amongst NCAA kind of officials, but also can threaten to, hey, we can do our own thing, and that's been this kind of vague overhanging threat against the NCAA for a while that has permeated in football and in basketball to some extent of like, well, we're going to take our ball and go home if you don't buy into what we want, and who cares what the mid-majors want, because if you don't have us, you don't have anything. And so I think that pressure is very significant for the NCAA, which is why I think the fact that the public pressure seems to be at least equal enough to that they're not coming to a conclusion is a good thing. Like, obviously, we've seen, if you are somebody who follows college basketball very regularly, you've seen tons of articles, name your favorite writer, whether it's Norlander, whether it's Goodman and the guys at Field of 68, whether it's Seth Davis, whether it's people at The Athletic. Like, there are tons of articles out there discussing their opinion or their thoughts on NCAA tournament expansion. And overwhelmingly, the public perception is we do not want this. And there's laying out why, because people will say, oh, there's more D1 teams, so we should have an expanded tournament. And like Norlander did a great article about why that's not necessarily the case, or why that's not something that needs to be moving in that direction. And so I do think that there's enough public pressure of like, keep this event as it is. Please do not change it. It is one of the truly great sporting events left in this country. And from a college perspective, I mean, obviously they've been tinkering with the college football playoffs, but the March Madness has been a stalwart and a successful event for decades at this point. It is one of the most successful sporting events in the country. And they don't want to mess with that if they don't have to. Obviously, they're feeling pressure to do so, but it's pretty clear to me, again, we kind of touched on this earlier, that the fact that they didn't come to a conclusion means they're feeling that pressure coming from the other direction too. Who wins out remains to be seen. But I also think that part of this conversation too, we're talking about like fans versus kind of officials, fan versus conference commissioners, fans versus NCAA leadership. But there are also players involved. There are also coaches involved. There are also, people who like the director of basketball ops and Dobos and people who plan scheduling and things involved in this as well. And I think that's another part of this is that, how do coaches feel about this? Norlander did some great reporting on this, Isaac, and kind of doesn't sound like there's a lot of coaches who are chomping at the bit to get this thing any bigger than it already is.
Yeah, Andy, that's great. Also, I will say quickly, Seth Davis is probably you mentioned his name. He's probably the loudest voice. Like if you want to read an expansion voice, his is probably the loudest of let's expand. And so just to give you a dissent because I always want people to be able to think for themselves on both sides of the aisle. So it's really interesting. Obviously this is anecdotal and just a group of coaches that Matt Norlander was around. But for those who are so locked in on EYBL and Nike and Peach Jam and stuff, there's also, we need to make sure we're aware of the other shoe circuits as well, Adidas and Under Armour and stuff like that. Matt Norlander has been down at basically the same area where Peach Jam happens with a bunch of coaches. And he tweeted on Sunday, heading home after 4 days on the recruiting trail, was surprised to learn plenty of coaches are content to stay at 68. Some like 72. Most I spoke to think 76 is overkill. Overriding sentiment from most of the around 15 coaches I spoke with was, I don't think we really need to change it. And he says coaches in that group include Alabama's Nate Oates, Duke's John Shire, Michigan State's Tom Izzo, Mike Young, Dan Hurley at UConn, Kelvin Sampson at Houston, Steve Forbes at Wake, Fred Hoiberg at Nebraska, Ross Hodge, and more and more and more. He says even guys like Sean Miller and Dusty May, who are welcoming to the idea of adding more teams, said, but if they keep it at 68, that's fine too. So, Andy, at least from this sample size of coaches that Matt Norlander was talking to, it sounds like the vast majority of them were either like, I don't think we need to change it, or I think I'm fine, either way. But the vast majority is like, if we're being told that coaches universally want to expand, it sounds like that's not as true as maybe we thought.
Yeah. And I think that's the takeaway, is that there's not this messaging that all the coaches want more. Some do. It sounds like, and again, 15 coaches, even if you are talking about some of the heavy hitters, obviously Izzo and Sampson and Hurley are Oates and Shire for that matter are big heavy hitters in this industry. It sounds like most of them are not. The way I interpret these statements from Norlander, kind of reading as much through the lines as we can, is that it doesn't sound like a lot of coaches have super strong opinions about this. I'm not getting the sense that Norlander spoke to anybody who was like, I am adamant, absolutely, that we need to expand this thing, or I am adamant that we need to stay where we are. It sounds like a lot of them were like, 76 feels like a lot, but 72 or 68, whatever. That's kind of the sentiment that I'm getting. And I would imagine more than anything else, these coaches just want to know what it's going to be. Just tell us whether we're going to have 4 more teams or not, so we can finalize our non-conference schedule, or prepare to, if we're a team, if you're Ross Hodge at West Virginia or whatever, and you think, hey, the bubble feels like a spot we might be, we'd like to know if that bubble is a little bit bigger, if we should be, thinking about what we need to do to make sure we're on the right side of that type of thing. So, yeah, I think that this makes sense. I do think that, the sample size here is not only a small group of coaches, but it's a group of overwhelmingly, in fact, I think all of the named coaches are high major coaches. So what does this look like if you're talking to, Herb Sendek at Santa Clara, or, other mid-major programs that kind of tend to be on the bubble, A10 coaches, WCC coaches, Mountain West coaches? I suspect your conversation looks a little bit different in that regard. So I'm very interested kind of And I don't know if they're planning to do this or not. We'll see. But I know that Norlander and Parrish have historically done their Candid Coaches series every offseason where they have like 100 anonymous coaches that they interview and ask a variety of questions. And I'm curious if NCAA tournament expansion will be part of that. I think it was last year, but it's still in the news. So I imagine they'll still have some input from coaches if that's something that they ask about at this point. But I think a part of it is not knowing what the NCAA is going to do or the committee is going to do with those extra bids too. If I like Santa Clara and San Francisco, I'll use them as examples because they're two teams that are regularly mid-majors that kind of float in and around the bubble every year, but never really make it except for one time for San Francisco. But I don't think the expanded bubble is going to help them all that much. If it did, I might be more in favor. But if it's going to get, Indiana from last year and West Virginia from last year or Cincinnati from last year in the field, but it's not going to help Santa Clara, it's not going to help, a Davidson or somebody else, some other mid-major team, then I'm not super interested. But I'm curious how mid-major coaches would feel.
Yeah, I was trying to look back while you were talking. I haven't scanned back to it yet. I remember John Rothstein at some point last week saying, hey, if this did happen, these were the next 8.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
And here we go. I just made it. Ohio State major, Boise State, Mountain West, SMU high major, Cincinnati high major, West Virginia high major, Northwestern high major, Indiana high major, Villanova high major. So 7 of those 8 next seeds would have been from the Power 5 conferences, and the other was Mountain West, whom, it was a 6-bid league 2 years ago. So it's like, cool. So basically, we're just getting more of those in. Okay, Andy, very quickly, and then we'll move on. One final thing from the Matt Norlander reporting on Sunday. He sent a screenshot of a text from Dusty May, a follow-up, said, great seeing you yesterday. For the record, if our objective is to possess the best tournament, 64 is the option. If we want to generate more revenue, then I'll leave that to the TV execs and the commissioners and let them decide the number. Either way, we Michigan will do our best to be in it, end quote. Andy, my takeaway from that is that gave me a little bit of a different thinking on this than I've really gotten to before. And the issue is, like, I've just been trying to look at it logically as a basketball fan. And the logical thing as a basketball fan is what Dusty May said. If we want the best tournament, then we go 64. But if we want to generate as much revenue as possible, that might be a different thing. And so the issue on the table here is best tournament versus revenue generation. And who is the we? What are we looking for, right? As you mentioned, fans, coaches, conference commissioners, etc. But in the best tournament versus revenue generation, my hope is that the two of those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think that's how we've continued to go about looking this. So my thought is, can we find new or creative revenue generation solutions without having to expand? Can we find more sponsorship? Can we do et cetera, et cetera? I don't know, whatever it is. But Andy, at the end of the day, I think people have been so myopically honed in on expansion that that's the only lens they can see, that they forget there are other worlds of opportunities out there that we could zoom out and look at other ways of doing this so that we could keep the beauty of the tournament as is and find other revenue generation possibilities. That just seems like the outside the box thinking that's not happening.
It reminds me a little bit of and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't know it directly, but the Jeff Goldblum quote in the first Jurassic Park movie, which was effectively like, we were focused so much on whether we could do something, we didn't think about whether we should. And I feel like there's some similarity here of like, we're so just hyper focused on growth and expansion and more financial gain that we're not thinking about, is this the actual right or correct thing to do or what the people want? And in some cases, I think there's, in other examples, they know that it's not what the people want and they don't really care. In this case, it does feel like that is being considered because, again, otherwise we'd have already had a decision here. So hopefully that means that may win out in this conversation. But like I said, I'm not holding my breath that this thing's going to stay at 68 for too much longer, but it does at least feel like they're taking the concerns on both sides very seriously. And I guess that's the best we can hope for right now.
Yeah. Andy, quickly before you move us on, what's hilarious about that Jurassic Park thing is I literally use that quote in teaching some of my classes at my college, and I just call it Jurassic Park theory. So way to go. You're the man. Keep going.
Happy to use Jurassic Park theory for you. Well, Isaac, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the other big news that happened over this weekend. The unfortunate news: Tahaad Pettiford, the starting guard for the Auburn Tigers, arrested over the weekend on a DUI charge. We're going to talk about what this might mean for Pettiford, what it means for Auburn, and also what it means in the new House settlement and NIL era. Could there be some additional ramifications that maybe we're not used to seeing in college athletics? We'll get to that to close out the show in just a second. All right, Isaac, closing out the show with the other news that we got over the weekend. Tahaad Pettiford, 19-year-old guard for the Auburn Tigers, arrested on Saturday morning on a charge of driving under the influence of alcohol. Because he's underage, they did not release the actual BAC, but in the state of Alabama, if you are under 21 years of age, you're not, beholden to the 0.08. It's just 0.02 or higher can result in a DUI. So we don't know a ton of details on the specifics of this case. We may not ever know the specifics here. We do know that he was released midday on Saturday after the arrest that morning. We do have some statements. We have a statement from Tahaad. We also have a statement from Coach Bruce Pearl, who said this to ESPN, quote, "We are aware of the situation and we will handle it internally with Tahaad and his family. We take these matters seriously and will learn and grow from it moving forward." So, kind of a bit of a boilerplate statement from Coach Pearl and Auburn. I'm not sure that you'd expected much more at this point. And again, without a ton of information, this is obviously a tough development for Auburn, a tough development for Pettiford, who made a pretty egregious mistake here. 19-year-olds tend to do that, so not a huge shock necessarily, but obviously something that has to be handled by Auburn here swiftly, as they've already had some incidents with the fight last year. They've had some stuff in the past, so now Coach Pearl and the Tigers are forced to figure out how they want to handle this situation.
The good news is, Andy, they've got UGA football in their own conference, so they don't have to worry. I mean, they've still got about 30 more infractions before they catch up to that. No, Andy, it's tough because, this is it is a serious situation, and it's also a thing that seems like it happens every year with high-profile athletes, whether in college basketball or other sports. And I don't say that to minimize the issue or mitigate the issue. How many people who have lost loved ones to drunk driving are screaming at what a big deal this is, or just, all of that. So this is a big deal. Unfortunately, it happens more regularly than it should. Obviously, there's the issue of, buddy, you are literally disobeying the law by drinking before you're 21. And I know people have opinions about that, whatever, but there's a whole bunch of that when you are a role model. I'm sure there are a bunch of young people listening to or watching this podcast right now that this is modeled behavior for them. Right. And you think about somebody like Tahaad, who is high profile. We speak wildly highly of him and his game on this show. We love what he does on the court. But we want to see that matchup off the court, right? You have a daughter, I have two young kids, and I want to be able to point them in the direction of people and say, man, this dude's super cool and look what he does. So, I doubt this has any impact on his draft stock, but this comes just after he pulled out of the 25 NBA draft, where he would have likely been selected in the second round of it. Andy, as you said, Tahaad releases a statement included in that. Last night, I made a serious mistake, and one that I take full responsibility for. My actions put myself, and as we alluded to, others at risk. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. There's no excuse, blah, 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 blah. Then he goes on to say later, this is not who I am and not who I will be. I'm committed to learning from this moment and making meaningful, positive changes in my life. I'm grateful for the support and accountability of those around me, and I will work to earn back the trust I've lost. As you said of Coach Pearl's statement, pretty boilerplate. Andy, just one other thing I want to say on his statement. I'll toss it right back to you. You said 19-year-olds are not known for making good decisions. And this is a good statement. But in this statement, he literally says out of one side of his mouth, I take full responsibility. And then out of the other side of his mouth, he says, this is not who I am. Well, those things are at odds with each other, because if you say I take full responsibility, you then go on to not make any excuses, which he does. And also, by definition, whether Tahaad wrote this or somebody wrote it for him and he signed off on it, you did this. So this is by definition who you are. So you don't get to say this is not who I am, which we see in all these statements like, I'm not the kind of person who gets a DUI. Well, you are, because you just got one. Right. And I don't say that anti-Tahaad, because we see this on literally every one of these statements. I just would like to see better writing from PR firm writers of these things, Andy. That's where I'm at on it.
This is not who I am is my least favorite statement in these kind of generic PR statements, because what does it mean? It doesn't really mean any, like it doesn't mean anything. I get what Tahaad is trying to say. I get the sentiment of like,
Yes.
I don't envision myself as somebody who is, has an issue with alcohol, or who would, flagrantly break the law, or
say that,
or whatever.
Say
but like,
that.
But you did do those like that is what happened here. And again, it doesn't mean that you are permanently stained. It does not mean that you cannot improve or whatever. And again, it's not meant to be judgmental on Tahaad or anything, but like, this is not who I am is just a statement that falls kind of flat when you're, especially when you're trying to, as you said, quote, take full responsibility for your actions. Like, that means that a part of you is somebody who does this. And again, it doesn't mean it's permanent, but it is for now. That statement just rings kind of hollow. So I think the main kind of thing that I'm curious about with this statement or with this situation for Tahaad Pettiford going forward is what Auburn does. He's not going to get like a massive suspension. It's going to be maybe a game or two. I hope that it's a regular season game, at least, just in terms of showing that they're taking it seriously. If they, have an exhibition game against West Georgia, whatever, and that's the only game he gets suspended for, then I feel like that kind of falls a little flat. If he does get suspended for 2-3 games, whatever, then I think it looks a little bit more serious from Auburn's perspective. We'll end up seeing what they do there. But Isaac, the other part of this conversation that I think is more unique in the modern post-house settlement era is, what does this mean for Tahaad from a financial perspective? If you're a professional athlete in any of the professional sports and you get suspended for this or suspended for anything, you lose money. You immediately lose money because you get game checks. And so if you're suspended for 5 games out of a, 82 game schedule, you lose, that percent of your income is gone because you don't get paid for games you were suspended for. That's not how it works in college basketball. And Tahaad may have already gotten a big paycheck from Auburn for this upcoming season. So if they suspend him, I'm just curious what that does. Does he have to pay back money? Is Bruce Pearl going to ask? Is he going to be fined? I know there's other college programs that have fined players. I'll use Gonzaga as an example. I know they fined players for getting technical fouls this year. Very different situation. Not comparing the two situations, but just knowing that fines are now a thing that you're seeing. So I'm very interested in this. And what if, does third-party NIL deals, do they start backing out over something like this? Not necessarily, but it could continue to happen if there's more, if there's other incidents with the law for Pettiford or other players. Like, I'm just interested now in an era where players are getting paid directly from schools. It feels like legal issues are going to get a little bit more complicated with the financial aspect.
Yeah, Andy, that's such a good point, because with house settlement stuff, we already were aware of like, oh, maybe ad sponsors pull out. But now there's the rev share side of this too. And that's what's interesting to me, because if there is a suspension, as Bruce Pearl said, it would come internally from the school. Right. What is the school's method of financial remuneration to Tahaad Pettiford? It is through rev share. So if the school suspends him, do they also fine him some of his rev share and force that back? Is that legal? Could they get sued for doing that? Like, all of these are things.
They already paid him. That's when demanding money back from him gets real sketchy.
Exactly. And what in this, there is so fresh and so new, we don't yet have precedent for it in the judicial system. So how does that play out, Andy? That's all the stuff that's really interesting to see to me. And so that's the thing about following the money, is there are these multiple revenue areas coming into him that he's going to have to pay attention to. So curious to see how, as you so well said, Andy, we hope the best for this young man. We hope that Coach Pearl, his parents, the staff, his fellow teammates hold him accountable to these things, because this shines a bad light on all of us. And so, man, whom among us has not sinned, right? Like, throw the first stone. That's literally from the Bible. Like, hand up, Andy. I've done it. I've messed up in my life, and I hope people do not view me by my worst days, right? I hope people would stand beside me and say, hey, buddy, let me come alongside you. Let's work through this. And I hope that's the case for Tahaad here.
Yeah, me too. I absolutely am in agreement on all of that. But yeah, I'm so interested. And I think so much of this comes back to a point that it feels like we bring up almost every single time we're talking about how settlement stuff is, like, how much of this gets solved when there is contracts, when there is more, like when there's collective bargaining. Like, at this point, it's like, we don't know when the school's paying Tahaad. We don't know how, like, are they giving him a lump sum? Are they paying him out game by game? I don't think they're doing that. But like, if we had some clarity, if we had a specific contract, there could be language in the contract that says, hey, if you get suspended, if you know, the famous phrase in pro sports, conduct detrimental to the team, this would absolutely qualify. But as far as we know, there's not anything like that for Tahaad. So yeah, if the school wants to demand money back, or if they want to fine him, like, you get into some legal murky water. And I don't think Tahaad, it would be incredibly poor form to start trying to demand his money or complain about getting fined. That's a really terrible look. So I don't think that's going to happen, but you're opening up a can of worms here. And again, I think eventually we're going to see some real messiness with these types of situations. Maybe not this one specifically, but things that will eventually be solved whenever this gets around to having collective bargaining and contracts and things of that nature, which unfortunately feels like we're still a decent ways away from being at that point.
Boy, you're right, Andy. That language would save us a world of heartache here in this situation. Good stuff. All right, gang. Thanks so much for being with us here on a Monday to start the week. It's great to be together. Andy and I have a couple of interesting weeks upcoming because we're both going to be traveling over the course of the next fortnight, to use a good British phrase. And so this week will be a pretty normal week. We have a fun interview coming up on Friday of this week. We've not yet recorded it, so I'm not going to tell you who it is in case something goes awry. But then next week, Andy will have Monday and Tuesday by himself. I'll have Wednesday through Friday. So be on tap with us. We'll still get you shows, as we say, even in the summer, even when we're traveling, man, we are here for you all. So to make sure you get all of that content, subscribe to the show on video and audio. If you want to be part of that Locked On College Basketball Discord Andy talked about off the top of the show, that link's in the show notes. It's absolutely free to join. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until tomorrow, peace.